arguments. I'm not saying they
most countries' populations were agrarian at the time.
Gotta let him respond, Cheshire.
I'm saying it's a non-point. Most countries were agrarian at the
shut
time.
up. I'm in the middle of my points. Anyways.
Latin America, in many places, were ruined by socialism and then the fascist backlash after the failures of socialism. The Middle East was ruined by many socialist dictatorships, which eventually fell into Islamist dictatorships. And Eastern Europe, where I hail from, was also ruined by socialism. And that'll be mine.
All right.
Floor is open.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and work backwards because you said a lot of not true shit. So I'm going to start with the statements that Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America were ruined by socialism. Actually, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America have been the perpetual victim of colonial imperialism on part of Western Europe and the United States, from the Spanish Empire to the British Empire to the German Empire, whom had concentration camps of their own down in Africa. These conflict regions with resource wars that are shackled with untold amounts of debt. Statistical data shows that while hundreds of billions of dollars worth of aid might be sank into Africa and the other poor regions of the world, trillions of dollars come out in the form of foreign direct investment, rents, the paying off of debts. You have the African countries that are still part of the Commonwealth in Britain. So I feel like it's kind of a broad-reaching conclusion to say it's socialism's fault. In fact, in a lot of instances, a lot of the times, living standards and conditions didn't really start to improve in a lot of these regions until they had their national liberation struggles where they broke away from colonialism and went their own way. There really hasn't been one country on this planet that has tried an alternative economic model to global capitalism that hasn't been relentlessly fucked with since day one. You know, Exhibit A, Cuba, Gaddafi's Libya, etc.
If you're going to the example of Libya to provide a democratic revolution of the people, I think that's a bit odd. Although, you talk about Western imperialism.
I was substantiating the point. I was substantiating the point that they were trying to implement an alternative economic model to capitalism, which is a kind of socialism of its own. But
their alternative economic problem is no better than feudalism.
So you have we can do this two ways. Hold on, buddy. Wait.
Let him get his points in, okay, Cheshire?
All right, so we can do this two ways. We can either go point by point, or you can continue to spam a bunch of points of your own and put me in a position where I have to respond to all of them in a timely manner. The choice is yours, but you're not going to cut me off when I'm responding to your arguments. So, I guess I'm going through the rest of your points, huh? And then we're really going to do it like this. So I don't know where you're getting your data that the Soviet economy was not particularly strong. They exported 20% of the world's industrial goods by the 1970s. Also, I love how you do what a lot of liberals do when you cherry pick the example of Japan, which was the #1 fastest growing economy on earth. But I don't understand why you don't pick the example of Brazil or South Asia or India or a variety of other countries that came from a similar starting point as the USSR. Does it not make sense to compare countries of similar economic parity from their respective starting points and see where they go over time? So far, based on what I've seen, it's actually been the Soviets and a lot of the socialist bloc camp countries that were the ones that escaped third world destitution, and at the very least achieved higher end of second world living standards. As for forced famines, now we're getting into conspiracy theories. That which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
So I think it's fair to go point by point, like Trav is asking. So if we can start, if we want to start with the Soviet economy, and then we can move point by point.
I have something.
Hold on. He already had his thing. I should be able to respond.
Yeah, but try to keep it more concise so that we don't have a huge gish gallop. Okay.
Right. So insofar as you're complaining about comparing it to Japan, the reason the economic comparison between the relative success of the Soviet Union and Japan is poignant is because the Soviet Union is one of the largest, if not it was the largest country on the planet. It was probably one of the most rich countries on the planet. It was probably the longest lasting socialist bloc country on the planet. And it was doing worse off than Japan, a tiny country, which a minuscule amount of resources and population, who had relatively shorter amount of time to grow and were nuked back into the feudal era.
Are we gonna skip the part where Japan was an empire of its own and they had billions of dollars of investment dumped into them after World War II? Are we gonna pretend like that part of the history wasn't a thing either?
So we're talking about the regrowth. We're talking about the Reconstruction era after World War II, where Japan lost all of its imperial holdings and was nuked multiple times. Every single industrial center in Japan was destroyed. The first largest one, Tokyo, was firebombed more than 5 times over the course of the war. The second 2 largest industrial zones that Japan had were nuked. Every other industrial zone was tiny and was also firebombed multiple times throughout the course of the war. And they lost all of their imperial territory, the only part of Japan that had any natural resources. Japan's success as an economy was due only to the free movement of capital, which is a hallmark of capitalism.
Investment. Yes. Yeah. Yes, when you dump billions of dollars of investment into a country, it helps them grow very quickly.
Oh, the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union couldn't do it when it was trying to invest in all of its border states after it took them over. The Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia got a shit ton of investments and aid from the United States and the Soviet Union throughout the course of the Cold War, and it was a failure of a fucking economy. It was on the wrong side of 30% unemployment. Right.
Yeah, I don't know where I said that I was in favor of market socialism. Yugoslavia is a different question of its own. But what I will say in regards to Soviet Union and Japan was an empire that had access to colonies and territories and pools of resources on its own. But otherwise, when you have the richest and most powerful country backing you, it does help. And mind you, it wasn't just because of investment in the free flow of capital that contributed to Japan's success. They had a very unique, specific set of economic conditions that were very particular to the time. They actually utilized central planning in some regard. The state and the capitalists actually collaborated with one another and so on. So while it was a capitalist economy, some degree of central planning was utilized in the development of Japan.
Do you think that every form of targeted investment led by a state who's looking for more foreign investment is a form of central planning? I'd also like to add that the strongest point of Japan's economy was while it was under the Conservative Party of Japan, who liberalized the economy even more, cut down regulations, and still doubled or more than doubled the average wage of the Japanese worker while going through this period of liberalization.
Sure.
Every successful economy of the 20th century went through a period of market liberalization before reaching its height of success. Even the Soviet Union and Communist China had to liberalize before they became a successful economy.
Okay, so it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, considering that it wasn't until after the liquidation of the Soviet state that we saw a 5 to 6 year drop in life expectancy across the former Soviet Union, as well as the crashing of wages, the crashing of their GDP, as a third of their economy was basically sucked out of the countries. Not only that, but we saw an estimated 8 million excess deaths from poverty-related causes that occurred in the wake of the 90s as well. So for all this talk about unleashing the beast of the private sector, it's funny that when capitalism is brought back, everything goes to shit. And a bunch of other examples, ignoring your cherry-picked example of Japan, and every other example.
Well, it's not just Japan. It's It's all of the Asian tigers. And many Western countries as well. Spain at some point had a faster growth rate than the Soviet Union. I think that's funny. Also had a higher GDP per capita at some point.
So basically, you've got Japan and the Asian tigers, which have a very unique history of their own. But this is the reason why the comparison with Latin America in general is more apt, because, again, similar starting conditions.
You like that comparison because Latin America is poorer So you want to use that?
No,
to make it look better. Yeah.
Latin.
Why do you
Latin
insist on
America,
comparing Brazil to the Soviet Union?
bro? Hold on, bro.
You
Wait.
gotta let him respond.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, Latin America and like certain sects of the Middle East were behind the Russian Empire, but it wasn't by that significant of a margin. The fact of the matter remains that at the start of the century, the Russian economy and the territories that became the USSR had more in common with a Latin America or like a South Asia than it did with like the Western countries, which
That's
had
not true.
a century head start. Okay, I can dig up the data for you here in a minute.
Well, the data is that Russia by 1913, before the start of the First World War, was the third largest economy in Europe, behind Britain and Germany. Then there was Russia, and when you compared it to GDP per capita, was the fourth largest economy of Europe, because even though France had a smaller economy, they'd have a higher GDP per capita. All right, Russia was not this backward Southeast Asian shithole, and then was magically transformed into this magical Soviet utopia. I would also add that the drop in life expectancy within the former Soviet Union proper goes against the grain, as for instance in countries like Germany, Czechoslovakia, Estonia, Latvia, those life expectancies have gone up, I presume, as well. And I would just say that the Soviet Union's collapse of life expectancy is what happens when any empire collapses. The Soviet Union was the world's largest empire. It invaded and conquered so many territories, and then once it no longer was able to force all the other Eastern European countries to feed into their resources.
Jumping from topic to topic, will you slow down?
This is what you said in your last statement.
When I'm back to your point in regards to development, 75% of their population lived out in the countryside. They were peasants. And the reason why they were experiencing an aforementioned boom in economic growth was due to a combination of increased demand for wheat on the global market, as well as agricultural developments. I'm not saying
most countries' populations were agrarian at the time.
Gotta let him respond, Cheshire.
It's a non-point. Most countries were agrarian at the time.
Shut up. I'm in the middle of my points. Anyways.